thank you all so very much for this opportunity to come and speak with you all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just get started. So, all right. Great. So I'll get started. Yes? Good. Well, I'm not going to provide too much of an introduction to the Global Compact, assuming many of you are well aware of this initiative being a participant of the Global Compact. We now count with over 16,000 companies from around the world, as well as 3,000 non-business participants. We have presence in over 160 countries through our Global Compact participation. And in addition to that, we have 64 local networks around the world, including in Bulgaria. And since around a year ago, we started hiring what we call country managers in different countries where we do not yet have a local network, so that we can start exploring opportunities for potentially creating a local network in the future. So in a nutshell, we have our 64 local networks plus 10 plus country managers. So you're all quite aware that the Global Compact really supports companies by providing it with a set of 10 principles on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And it calls on companies to use these 10 principles as really the entry point into the Sustainable Development Goals. So the idea is to ensure that companies still have their house in order, that they are doing no harm. And the 10 principles really provide that baseline, responsible practice framework, I would say. And the idea is for companies to then ensure that they have their house in order, and then look at the 10 principles, and look at the Sustainable Development Goals and see the opportunities they potentially could tap into based on their core business. So the role of the private sector in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is really critical. We're well aware that we are not on progress to achieve the SDGs. We're actually quite far from it. We know from a climate standpoint, the globe is only warming faster. So it's predicted for us to reach over 3%. And we already see the result of climate change, the impact that it's having on the world. And we are all expected to come together and set these ambitious goals. So to ensure at a minimum, we are not increasing the global warming beyond the 1.5. In addition to that, we know that over 2 billion people are lacking in safe drinking water. Percentage of protected ocean areas is increasing. But the idea is that there are double the dead zones that we have witnessed in the past. And so it's very adamant, it's very important to take relevant action. We know from a labor standpoint, over 160 million of children are still stuck in child labor, amongst other issues on the labor chain. Over 260 years will be needed to close the economic gender gap. And finally, the annual cost of bribery is $1.5 to $2 trillion. So we know that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to achieve the SDGs. And the private sector has an incredibly important role in doing so. We've seen from the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer that business is the most trusted institution. Very interesting to see that, particularly during the pandemic, we saw how the private sector came together and provided a safety net to many of its employees as well as its communities. And so the private sector has increased in trust amongst the world. We also see that CEOs are seeing the future business value of corporate sustainability. We run an annual implementation survey whereby we see to what extent companies are committed to the 10 principles and the SDGs and to what extent they find it valuable. And we saw that 99% of CEOs from companies with annual revenues over 1 billion believe that sustainability will be important to the future success of their business. So as you can see here on the slide, we have an indication, first and foremost, that companies see value with regards to brand increase, revenue growth, risk mitigation, and cost reduction. And you can see in the blue bar towards the bottom that this reflects how they see the future. So the darker blue bar shows that they see that there is value in these different segments today, but the lighter blue bar sees that there's value in the next 5-10 years. So it's very clear that companies see the future value as well of sustainability. And they are also motivated, of course, by both consumer and employee expectations. 73% of the CEOs that we surveyed showed that consumers have the biggest impact on the way they manage sustainability. And 83% of consumers think that companies should be actively shaping best practices on sustainability. So it's very, very clear that there is a drive from both consumers as well as employees for sustainability. And why is sustainability important for a company? Obviously, there are benefits that a company will be reaping. First and foremost, with regards to growth, sustainability is an opportunity for companies to access new markets and geographies, to access new customers and market shares based on a new sustainable product line, for example. It also catalyzes innovation. There are a lot of opportunities to innovate in the sustainability space because there are still a lot of solutions to be developed. And so this drives R&D and innovation. And of course, it is an imperative to a long-term strategy. It is not short-termism. It is very much about the long-term sustainability of a company. And so embedding corporate sustainability into its strategy allows for long-term considerations. In addition to that, there are productivity benefits to corporate sustainability from an operational side, from a human capital side. Again, as we noted, employees are more keen to join sustainable companies nowadays, especially if companies are trying to attract young talent. They want to work for companies that reflect their own personal values. And so we see an increased level of productivity amongst employees when they're working for companies that they feel proud about. Not to mention operational efficiencies. This also brings me to the final category, which is risk management. We know that if there are disruptions, whether it's the supply chain or to employees doing their job, this is going to cause operational supply chain risks, not to mention reputational ones. So corporate sustainability can also be seen as a risk management tool because it forces companies to run impact assessments and due diligence well ahead of time to identify what the potential risks could be within its ecosystem, and then to take mitigating factors to avoid those risks. We also see that companies, especially obviously we're looking now at those larger companies, say that are publicly listed, they have higher ESG scores than those that are non-participating in the Global Compact. So we have, through the Boston Consulting Group, done a very thorough evaluation to see that indeed Global Compact companies score higher in ESG than non-Global Compact companies. So now I want to move into the Global Compact's new 2021-2023 strategy. And I want to emphasize the 5 major shifts that really underpin this strategy. First and foremost, companies are now being held to account more than ever. What does this essentially mean? I'll be speaking to this in different slides, but maybe just briefly, what the Global Compact has done is that it has first and foremost launched a whole new reporting framework. So starting from February of 2023 next year, all of you will be reporting to the new reporting framework, which has 60 mandatory questions to complete. In the past, you would ask companies to simply upload a sustainability report and respond to just a few questions here and there around what was in the report. Now we're not asking companies to do that anymore. We're actually asking them to complete a very robust survey of 60 mandatory questions that are aligned with the SDG targets as well as the 10 principles. So the framework is organized under human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, as well as governance. And it looks at the policies, the practices, and the outcomes. And what this 60 mandatory questionnaire includes are multiple choice questions whereby you can select the best practices that may or may not be in your company. And then finally, there's always an opportunity to respond to an open-ended question. So that's how we're holding companies to account now. There will also be, in the next year or two, we're going to start doing checks to see whether companies are also making progress on some of the goals that they have set out in the framework. And so this is also really critical. We want companies to improve their practices, not necessarily stay stagnant. So if they're saying that they're going to achieve XYZ goal, say reducing their carbon emissions, they need to be very transparent around how quickly they're going to achieve that goal. And in this new COP, they're going to communicate how they're progressing every year. So we are going to start looking for progress. That's the way that we hold our companies to account. In addition to that, the Global Compact strategy is also very much focused on ensuring that companies around the world, even when there's no local network, have global coverage, are engaging through local or regional presence. So this is what we call balanced growth of local and regional networks for global coverage. I just mentioned that we have 10 country managers in prioritized countries around the world, whereby we've hired these people to start recruiting companies and to determine whether there is a viability for a local network in the next year or two. In addition to that, we also have what we call our regional hubs. I have a slide that provides a bit of an overview on these regional hubs, but just for your understanding, we have 5 regional hubs around the world. I myself am situated out of the Dubai hub, which covers our presence in Eastern Europe as well as in the Middle East. And we're going to be hiring more people to support our presence within the region, to support our existing local networks, including in Bulgaria, and then also to support countries within the region that do not have local networks as well. Then we move to our major shift number 3. So that is around measurable impact in prioritized areas. The Global Compact has already identified what it's called its lead and shape areas. So that is largely SDG 5 on gender empowerment, SDG 13 on climate change, SDG 8 on decent work, SDG 16 on governance, and SDG 17 on partnerships. And so these are the 5 lead and shape areas, and we are identifying, or we have identified, impact goals. For example, on the climate piece, it's the 1.5. It's ensuring that more companies now have science-based targets that are aligned with science and aligned with the 1.5 trajectory, ensuring that our globe is not warming beyond the 1.5 increase. And so we are going to be working even more with companies as well as with governments to help achieve those impact goals. So we're going to be doing a lot more work in the next 2 years around this. Another major shift of our strategy is the SME focus. We never used to have an SME strategy, now we do. So the SME strategy is available on our website. You can take a look and you can read through it. Most of what you see in the SME strategy is going to be rolled out next year. I can give you one example of what we're going to be doing. We are going to be working with multinational corporations, and we're going to be working with them to support the SMEs within their supply chains to join the Global Compact and to make very notable sustainability changes in their companies. So it's great because we have a very important partner, which is the multinational corporation that will help provide us access to their supply chain and to their SMEs within that supply chain. And we'll be working with them, training them to become more sustainable. In addition to this, of course, we're going to be developing more and more resources that are really targeting SMEs because we understand that SMEs have very different challenges than larger companies. And then finally, a major shift with the Global Compact is the strong and active engagement with the UN. One note that I'll make with regards to that is we are going to be working with what we call the guardians of the 10 principles. So we have the respective guardians that oversee our implementation of the 10 principles. So for environment, it's UNEP. For anti-corruption, it's UNODC. For human rights, it's the High Commissioner on Human Rights. And for labor, it's ILO. And so these guardians, first and foremost, we're going to have working work plans that we will be developing with these guardians, and we'll be rolling out the work with our local networks. In addition to that, we have dedicated seats on our board for these guardians. And so it's really great to be working very closely with them, but making sure that we're moving from just policy to actual practice and activities. So we're going to be doing a lot more work with regards to those guardians.